My name's Dave Crowder. I'm a new faculty member at Washington State University. So I've only been working on wheat for about 3 months, but I'm appreciative to be here and be incorporated into the Biotic team, and hopefully we'll be able to integrate some of our work more fully going forward. So a lot of the work I'm going to talk about today has been done by Keith Pike, who's just retired from our department, and Aaron Esser on wireworms. So wireworms are a beetle species. The primary pest is in the soil. So the larvae live in the soil and can live for 2 to 8 years in the soil before they emerge. And kind of the impetus for this whole project was actually insecticide trials, where Aaron went out there and we were seeing this kind of damage. You can see these wheat fields are completely infested with weeds. And we've been finding that misdiagnosis of this damage is very common among growers who are either attributing it to poor weed control, soil-borne diseases, or actually just poor seed quality. Did it get treated with insecticides? Because it can't be wireworms. So like many pests, these wireworms have been kind of out of sight, out of mind. They've been controlled with organochlorines, which is a particularly nasty type of insecticide. As those insecticides have been removed from the market, these guys have reemerged as significant pests of a variety of cereal crops. So again, here, the impetus for this project, we see in these control plots where we're not applying insecticides to the seed, we're getting basically no stand establishment, whereas here we're getting much higher rates. But the newer generation insecticides have not been too effective for wireworms in many cases. So here's that same trial again, just to give you an example, ready for harvest. Eventually the entire yields of whole fields can be lost, more or less, to these guys. So the focus of our research just last year, and we're going to try and broaden this and hopefully integrate with more of the REACCH groups this year, because like earthworms, wireworms are affected by a lot of climatic variables and microclimates in the soil, as well as just the different types of cropping rotations. But first of all, what we've just tried to do in this last year is just determine which species are present out here in Washington and kind of look a little bit at their ecology. What are the climatic drivers of these species distributions? So here's another field again with wireworm damage in Idaho. So to do some of this sampling work, we've been using a technique called bait ball sampling. Here we see these are basically just balls of oatmeal that have honey in them. You dip them in water and bury them in the soil, and they release CO2. That attracts the wireworms to the bait balls. Then we can go back in after about 7 to 10 days, collect these bait balls, and you'll see here are the larval stages of the wireworms. And we have these different species present. And we've been confirming their identities using established keys, as well as doing some DNA work in conjunction with Montana State University. So we were actually kind of surprised at how much diversity of these wireworms we found. These are just in spring wheat of Washington. Going forward, we're going to try and expand our sampling out into Idaho and Oregon and try and encompass more of the whole REACCH region. Basically, you see the community is dominated by these two species, Limonius infuscatus and Limonius californicus. Very little is known about these two species, just because most of the work on wireworms has been done in Europe and Canada, and they're not as big of problems there. I highlighted this other species, which we've found just in Pullman, and this is the major pest in Europe. So we see there's kind of a broad variation, but we have these two dominant species. They seem to be really associated with these broad climatic zones. Hopefully, we're integrating within REACCH and want to kind of narrow this down to see what's really driving these distributions. So as I said, this is kind of preliminary work, and hopefully we can integrate more with the climatic groups and the cropping system groups to figure out what's really driving these patterns. In the dryland regions, I apologize, this should say Limonius californicus, so we have that species as predominant. In the higher precipitation regions of the eastern Washington. We'd like to expand that out to Idaho in the coming years and see if these patterns hold. In the irrigated region, we see this Limonius infuscatus species is occurring here, and then as we move into Oregon, we have another new species. So the reason that this matters is because these different species have different abilities to become pests, and they're differentially susceptible to pesticides. So here's a trial with the Limonius californicus. The unprotected wheat seed is completely devastated by this species, whereas this Limonius infuscatus species does not seem to be as bad of a pest, and the density is kind of wane out later in the season. So starting to understand some of the climatic factors driving these distributions, the cropping system factors driving this distribution is going to be necessary for us to start to develop management strategies for this pests. Just in the last year, we have done some work on the no-till fallow system versus a continuant wheat cropping system. We see a fallow system incorporating that into a rotation has about a 60% reduction in wireworms. So going forward, hopefully we can learn a little bit more about these different factors and how they're affecting our wireworms. So just in summary, this is just a one-year survey that we did just in Washington State in spring cereals, spring wheat fields. We're trying to expand that as part of the REACH program into winter wheat and barley, as well as the spring wheat. And as I mentioned, just these different species are going to impact what a farmer might do to manage wireworms. So really understanding what drives their distributions is going to be central to this. So with that, I'd like to just thank Keith Pike, who just retired from our department and really was the driving force behind a lot of this research, as well as Aaron Esser, who's extension up in Lincoln County, and grad student Ivan Milosevic. So thanks a lot.